The Galactic Council chamber drifted in the black between suns, a faceted spire that had watched civilizations bloom and crumble for millennia. Today it hummed with a different energy, tension wrapped in protocol. Lieutenant Elizabeth Lizzie Chin stood at the observation rail, her silhouette ghosting along the transparent alloy viewport as the council conducted an emergency session behind her. 12 elder species, artifacts of epochs older than humanity itself, reclined in their biopods and argued in slow, ancient cadences. A translator's voice crackled through the chamber. The Valkyrie hive had violated the neutral belt. 3 colony worlds had been overrun, 40 million lives torn away. On the tactical holomap, red blots spread outward like contagion. Lizzie didn't flinch. She watched the display the way a surgeon studies a failing heart. The Valkyrie were unlike any foe the Council had planned for. Living warcraft that propagated by devouring sentient ecosystems. They had come out of dark space half a year ago and had already swallowed diplomats and probes alike. Protocols were exhausted. Entreaties, embargoes, surgical interventions, all had been absorbed by the organism's relentless appetite. Dorian Hale approached in his ceremonial uniform, metals catching thin light. He was barely 30 but carried a veteran's gravity. "They've decided," he said softly. Lizzie turned, predicting the verdict. The Council would withdraw to fortified orbits, carve out a quarantine bubble and concede the outer colonies. Leave the Valkyrie their spoils and avoid escalating to full-scale slaughter. Dorian's bitterness was a low flame. He corrected the Council's cold phrasing. 40 million were not just bodies but lives, alien and human alike. Lizzie laughed, a small, unreadable sound. Those at the table had known peace for tens of centuries. Their ethics were honed by long calm, not desperation. They feared the shape of unbound warfare. The Archon had called humanity primitive. Its translator judged humans dangerous because their ancestral instincts still brooked decisive violence. The remark stung. For a moment something tightened in Lizzie's face. Not anger exactly, but the coolness of a mathematician reaching a solution. Dorian, who had served beside her, recognized it. This was the moment when calculation eclipsed debate. She issued a single command: move to the hangar. That quiet order carried a world of implication, the kind of decision that changes treaties and carves history. Dorian hesitated less than a breath, then obeyed. The emergency beacon pulsed, and a plan, hidden beneath uniforms and respectability, began to move. 20 minutes after the emergency signal, the chamber's security attempted to contain her, and Lizzie had expected every contingency. Human membership in the Galactic Order was young, barely 40 years of formal diplomacy, and with that youth came both a hard-won tactical knowledge and a lack of institutional trust. Humans served, observed, and cataloged system weaknesses. They were not granted broad powers. When the security chief, a Crethean with muscular forelimbs and a culture steeped in violent ritual displays, blocked her path, he issued the prescribed order: stand down. Lizzie met his compound eyes without hesitation. The seconds clicked like gears. She offered a single ultimatum: move or be made irrelevant. He did not move. He had never faced a species that refused to posture. Lizzie's counterstrike was precise and merciless in the way trained violence can be. 2 arms snapped, momentum carried her past him, and her fingers danced across the holographic interface. She broadcast on every human band: Lieutenant Elizabeth Chin, Terran Expeditionary Force. Authorization Omega Black 7. The Council has abandoned defensive operations. All human vessels released from Accord compliance. Rules of engagement unrestricted. The chamber froze. Protocols and treaties, the scaffolding of interstellar civility, were being overridden by one human voice. From the hangar, Dorian's radio came jagged and taut. If they did this, the galaxy would finally see why Earth's rise had been so rapid, not because of technology alone, but because Earth remembered war. Lizzie's response was crisp. They would demonstrate predator mode. Not gratuitous slaughter, she implied, but a return to a primal, organized ferocity the Valkyrie could not counter. 6 hours later, the first human offensives caught the Valkyrie's attention. The invaders had adapted to the Council's restrained, elegant campaigns: surgical strikes, precise targeting, avoidance of unnecessary loss. The Valkyrie had evolved to survive against such curated warfare. What confronted them now was something different. Human fleets flying in wolfpack patterns, coordinated and relentless, informed by millennia of pack-hunting instincts distilled into starship tactics. They did not limit themselves to military nodes. They burned supply chains, reproductive vessels, waypoints, even the empty pockets of space where Valkyrie might lurk. On the bridge of the flagship Persistence, Dorian watched the tactical bloom and issued the order that sealed the philosophy: Fire Solution Delta 9, atomize that hive cluster. His exo reported no validated military targets in the sweep, but he replied with cold conviction: there would be targets if they did not act. Humans fought campaigns, not single battles. They sought to erase future threat, not merely to win a skirmish. The cost was immediate and grievous. In the aftermath of the initial human onslaught, the Valkyrie retreated, not in peaceful surrender but as a scattered, traumatized hive mind driven back into the dark between stars. The human victory was brutal and strategic. 30 ships were lost, 12,000 crewmen and women died, and entire Valkyrie hive clusters were reduced to expanding plasma fields where living vessels once wove. Yet the campaign had achieved its grim calculus. 3 colony worlds, the ones first consumed by the Valkyrie surge, were spared further devastation. 40 million lives were preserved by force. Back in the council chamber 72 hours later, a heavy silence replaced debate. The Archon's translated voice was measured but with a new edge: you violated every accord of civilized warfare. Lizzie's answer was simple and honest: yes. The council's old fear of human nature had been justified. Humanity had proved capable of the predatory extremes the Archon had accused them of. Yet Lizzie added a counterpoint that cut to the bone of her actions. Sometimes, to safeguard civilization, the civilized must remember the savage roots from which they arose. Peace breeds forgetfulness of the price required to protect it. Humans had not forgotten. This was not a boast, nor was it mere justification. It was a thesis, that the capacity for ruthless, controlled violence, honed and directed, can act as a shield for vulnerable lives. The Archon, ancient and immense, weighed that truth and responded in kind. The council would issue a formal censure. But even the Archon admitted, in halting translation, an awkward gratitude: 40 million existed because humans had been willing to become monsters on their behalf. Fear of humanity would grow, the Archon warned, and perhaps that fear was deserved. Dorian found Lizzie as they left the chamber. The weight of consequence sat between them, a quiet thing neither could wholly deny. We'll face repercussions, he said. Lizzie nodded, not with arrogance but with the stoic acceptance of someone who had balanced one terrible set of outcomes against another. The dead would not return and punishment from the galactic body might follow. Still, those 40 million would live. For Lizzie that verdict was enough. As they stepped toward the starlit corridor, the optics shifted. These were predators who chose to use their nature to protect, not to dominate. It was a paradox wrapped in duty. The human crews would mourn and rebuild, and the council would debate and adapt. But the immediate truth remained visible in the cold afterglow. The Valkyrie had been driven away and the cost, both moral and mortal, had been paid. In the days that followed, the galaxy's balance shifted subtly. The council's chambers dimmed with a new unease. Elder species retreated into contemplation of the revelation humanity had forced upon them. Peace does not absolve responsibility to defend it. The encounter rewired diplomatic calculus. Where once treaties had been sacrosanct, leaders would now weigh the possibility that restraint could be exploited by beings with no scruples. The Archon's censure was formal and stinging, but woven through the reprimand was an admission of a harsher truth. Sometimes moral strictures become hollow in the face of annihilation. Humanity, for its part, found a strange dual reception. Some envoys and allies viewed them with a mixture of gratitude and wary distance. Grateful that entire biospheres had been saved, wary because humans had proven they could and would unleash terrifying force. Others feared the precedent. If one species could unilaterally abandon accords when it judged them insufficient, what guarantee remained that worse acts might follow in other hands? The debate threaded through council halls, late-night strategy rooms, and the quieter recollections of those who had watched friends die in service of a campaign. Lizzie's actions crystallized into a lesson for history. She had not acted out of bloodlust. Her move was irrational, cold arithmetic. Lives weighed against law, permanence against principle. She had used memory of humanity's violent past not as a badge to glorify warfare but as a tool to defend what mattered. In the corridors where decisions were made, some met that with approval, many met it with fear. The truth was ambiguous and uncomfortable. The ability to be monstrous could be morally enlisted to preserve the moral. Dorian stood beside Lizzie as they walked into starlight. The future was uncertain. Sanctions and diplomatic scars might shape the next decades. But for those on the 3 defended worlds, for the families who would watch new suns rise rather than watch their children consumed, there was a simpler verdict. The humans had chosen protection over purity. They had invoked controlled savagery and paid the price for it. The Council's ancient inhabitants had been forced to re-examine assumptions about civilization, war, and the cost of peace. Humans had shown them a new face of defense, terrifying in its intensity, noble in its self-sacrifice, and the galaxy would not soon forget the lesson.